Devolution. Goodness me, is it really that long? Pete Wishart to move.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's with great pleasure that I open this debate on 20 years of devolution on behalf of the Scottish Affairs Committee and the Welsh Affairs Committee. 20 years of devolution, and it is hard to believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, 20 years since our parliaments opened their doors, transforming our nations and redefining the political culture of our countries. Our nations are better because of devolution. Our national life has been transformed, and we now have a distinctive voice because we have a parliament within our nations. Madam Deputy Speaker, devolution has come of age, and there will be no going back to the days before our parliaments opened the doors to the world. And I remember that day 20 years ago. I was going to be a candidate for the Scottish Parliament. It was only the finishing of a Runrig album that got in the way and delayed my parliamentary career by 2 years. And I sometimes wonder what would have happened had I managed to secure a place in the Scottish Parliament. I'm hearing there's still time yet, as somebody approaching the autumn of their careers. Maybe we'll just think about that one. But I remember the expectation that was in the air, that the sense of anticipation, the excitement that was there. At last we could get down to the business of designing our own future because we had our parliaments. And I'll never forget the look on Donald Dure's face when he said, "There will be a Scottish Parliament," and he just had to add, "I like that." Or Winnie Ewan taking the chair for the first time. Winnie Ewan, whose 90th birthday was yesterday, a celebrated figure in Scotland and somebody we owed a great deal of debt to. When Winnie Ewing said, "The Scottish Parliament adjourned on March 25th, 1707, is hereby reconvened." And we've had our disagreements like any normal Parliament and Assembly. We've scrutinised governments the way that we do everywhere else. But we also have worked, I believe, in a great deal of consensus. And there has been fantastic examples of cross-party work, and there's been great examples of pioneering work and innovation in the Scottish Parliament. It's worth having a look at some of the things that we have achieved in the course of those 20 years. The pioneering health work. The first country within the United Kingdom to introduce a ban on smoking in public places. And we know the health dividend that has come from securing that piece of legislation. Very recently we've introduced minimum unit pricing for alcohol, and already there's reasonable evidence that that is starting to have an impact on health outcomes too. There's the democratic reforms, the fact that we now have votes for 16 and 17-year-olds in the Scottish Parliament. We have proportional representation for local government, as we do for the election of its Parliament itself. And then there's the social agenda, the free personal care for our elderly in Scotland, the free higher education and free prescription charges. All of these initiatives and many, many more make our country, or help making our country, a better and fairer one. And it's often credited to Donald Dewar, but it was in fact a Welshman, Ron Davis, who said that devolution is a process, not an event. And what a process, and what a journey we've been on. That in terms of being a legislative body, the Scottish Parliament is an entirely different creature from the one that opened its doors back in June 1999. Two further Scotland Acts which followed the 1998 Act to establish the Parliament in the shape of the 2012 Act and the 2016 Acts have significantly increased the powers of the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Parliament now has control over large swathes of welfare legislation, and powers over taxation means that we can now set our own income tax rates within Scotland. Wales is about to become a Senate, and we now have a government. In Scotland, we've had coalition government, we've had majority government, even though the rules were supposed to forbid such a thing, and we've had 2 episodes of minority government. But still, we move forward. Now, of course I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Would he agree with me that the Welsh Assembly has come even further, given that we were somewhat behind our Scottish friends at the start of this process, and that it has now travelled from being essentially a glorified county council to being a lawmaking body, which will hopefully proceed very quickly to have many more lawmaking and tax-raising powers, leading eventually to independence.
I am more than happy to agree with my honourable friend, and I think as we observe what's happened in Wales, the pace of the change in Wales has been quite dramatic, and he's right to talk about it now being a law-making assembly, and the fact that I listened to some of the debate yesterday about the renaming in the Senate, which I think will be a very worthwhile and valuable thing to do, and I think that's what we are. We're on a journey, and it's not finished, and it's not complete then. But now, yes, of course I give way.
Making a very strong case for what has been achieved in the last 20 years, and I welcome that. Does she agree that by virtue of the make-up of the Scottish Parliament and the system by which we elect our MSPs, that it's right, it's actually to be advocated that parties should work together, that there should be no demarcation lines about who will work with who, but that we should always be working together for the benefit of Scotland?
Nothing in that which I could possibly disagree with. And we have had examples of coalition government within the Scottish Parliament, and it was designed on that basis. And I think that when the Labour Party and the Liberals particularly put together the Scottish Convention, that was the view, and that was what was expected and anticipated. The fact that we've been in a particular journey and we have had a variety of different arrangements for government, I think shows the versatility. If he doesn't mind, I want to make sure that the honourable member who chairs the Welsh Affairs Committee, because obviously gets a chance too. But there now has been a flurry of activity around devolution just now. We've got the review which has been initiated by the UK Government, which will be conducted by Lord Dunlop. And there's still an ongoing debate about completing the powers of the Scottish Parliament with independence for Scotland. That continues to be the most debated and defining issue, I think, in our political and public life in Scotland just now. So the one thing you can say about devolution, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's never boring, and and our Parliament has brought Scotland to the attention of the world. Our international footprint has increased because of devolution, and more people know about our beautiful country and what our beautiful country does as a consequence of devolution.
Would you give way on that point?
Of course I will.
Just very briefly, because I think it's still the case, but it was certainly the case at the time, that when the Scottish Parliament passed the Equal Marriage Bill, it had the highest majority for equal marriage of any legislature anywhere in the world. And in fact, it is the only legislature in the world that, when presented with legislation to extend equality to its citizens, has always voted for it. Isn't that a good thing, and isn't that progress that should always be protected in future?
My honourable friend makes, of course, a good, valid and strong point, and you're absolutely right to say what he did about equal marriage and the way that the Scottish Parliament responded to it, as to other progressive social issues. And I'm particularly proud that in Scotland, with our Parliament, we've taken up these causes so dramatically and consistently, and I really hope and look forward to further such bits of progress in the future. But it's right that we keep devolution under review, and I'm proud of the work that my committee has done in the course of the past few weeks and months when we looked at the devolution after 20 years. Now, we focused particularly on intergovernment relations, and we suggested a number of far-reaching conclusions and reforms which, if implemented, we believe will make a significant difference to the quality of intergovernmental relations which exist throughout these islands just now. I think what we can agree on is that institutionally the Parliament has functioned well, and it's now, I believe, an immovable feature, and it's secure in the fabric of our democracy, is there to stay. But the relationships between the governments haven't kept pace with the developments of devolution, and the machinery for dialogue and engagement has not kept up with the evolving dynamics of devolution. What we have found is that intergovernment relations are under pressure like never before. And it seems to be like, having emerged from the experience of the independence referendum, they've been challenged within an inch of their lives because of Brexit. But before I go into that, the good news is that it seems to be the relationship between the two institutions work and function well at a sub-political level. The work between civil servants, for example, continues unabated, and we heard solid and good evidence from senior civil servants that all this has been conducted perfectly well and there is work being done behind the scenes. But we were concerned just about the quality of the relationships that there is across these islands, and we've recommended a number of things. Of course, I'll give way.
Thank you very much. I thank the honourable member for giving me. He's making a very strong case. But would he agree with me that the responsibility for the relationship between the two governments is not something which we should dictate by paperwork, which we should have to resort to legislation for, but that it's up to the two parties of government to be grown up and sit round the table and be constructive in the discussions, rather than what we often witness here, which is a petty bickering about just about everything they can find an excuse for?
I think, and I'm grateful to that contribution from the Honourable Lady, who's an assiduous member of the committee, as I'm looking around the chamber and seeing other assiduous members too. But what I would say to her is that she's right to agree, but I think that it's incumbent upon us that we have the mechanism, the infrastructure, the machinery, that where governments do disagree, as they will disagree, where they have particularly different policy objectives, that we have in place something that's able to accommodate that, will shape it up and resolve some of the tensions and difficulties that are encountered. And I want to go on particularly because the Honourable Lady knows that this is something that we looked at in great detail and took a great deal of evidences. But maybe if we go back to the beginning, Madam Deputy Speaker, because in the early days of devolution, of course, it was all straightforward and easy. The Labour Party were in administration in Cardiff and Edinburgh and London. Intergovernment relations were conducted amongst comrades, friends and colleagues who just picked up the phone, got in touch with each other, and those difficulties were pretty much resolved very easily. And I'm sure you'll remember those days, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's only one issue where it wasn't, and it remains in the name of the bar in the Scottish Parliament, where, in quite a dramatic rebuke to Scottish colleagues who dared to suggest that they should become a government, Big Brother down here from the Labour member said they could call themselves the White Heather Club, but they will never be a government. And to that day, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bar in Holyrood is now the White Heather Club, in testimony to that fantastic rebuke from Big Brother Westminster Labour colleagues. And it actually took 3 years for this government to keep up to pace with the change. When Alex Salmond rebranded the then pathetically named Scottish Executive, it had to be said, into the Scottish Government, and it took 3 years for that to be acknowledged in this place. But I would think it would be fair to say that that cosy relationship that existed in the early days of devolution was pretty much shattered with the arrival of the SNP minority government back in 2007. This was an SNP government that was prepared to push the boundaries of the devolution settlement and trying to define a new means and method for us to assert ourselves as a nation. And they weren't content just by being restricted to what was available in the then devolution settlement. And then, of course, came the independence referendum, and who will ever forget that? And then what we found, and what was a curious thing about the independence referendum, was that intergovernment relationships survived that relatively intact, and that was because there was a need for engagement between two governments, and we had the Edinburgh Agreement, and there was rules set up for that. And I think that was a lesson to us that, things can be done if the structure, rules and a means to come together for agreed objectives. And I think the agreed objective during the independence referendum is it would be done properly and constitutionally. Brexit's broken that. What you have with Brexit is two governments, one in Scotland, one in London, with totally different objectives when it comes to this idea of leaving the European Union. Scotland wanted nothing whatsoever to do with Brexit. Returned one MP with a mandate for an EU referendum who consistently have said that this is something which we find counter to our national interests. And of course we have a UK government determined to deliver that objective. But what we should have in place is the means to be able to accommodate that, to be able to ensure that these type of differences will be able to be dealt with and will be negotiated smoothly. And that's what brings us to the machinery of all of this now. And what we have at the very top of this, of course, is the Joint Ministerial Committee. We looked at a number of options about how that may be transformed or even replaced, but we came to the conclusion that replacing it wasn't something that I think would have been suited and would have served any great purpose. So what we did was suggest a number of things that we could do to improve the function of the Joint Ministerial Committee. Because right now it's not working, and it's not working. It doesn't have the confidence of the Scottish Government, and it doesn't particularly have the confidence of the Welsh Government. It's the UK Government that set the agenda. They're responsible for all the dispute resolutions, and it's them that seem to be the arbiter about what happens and how things are conducted. What we said is that things have to change dramatically, and there's one phrase in our report that runs through practically every chapter, and that is parity of esteem. So what we proposed for the JMC is a body where all four of the different governments are treated as equals, and as such we recommended that the JMC meeting should be hosted and chaired by each of the UK administrations on a rotating basis, and that meetings should be held frequently, set to a set schedule, and that agendas should be agreed in advance between all parties. We also asked the government to explore third-party mediation, because again we had a number of pieces of evidence which suggested that this wasn't working. We also said that the JMC should look at dispute resolution. And we also made a number of recommendations about Whitehall departments. These should become devolution-proof. What would concern us more than anything else was... Yes, of course, I'll give you 200 friends.
I am very grateful he's being generous. Just further to that point about the JMC, it has been, of course, described as not fit for purpose in its current form. I mean, its purpose would be gratefully aided were it to have its own secretariat and actually have a statutory basis as well.
Hear, hear.
That was one of the things that we have recommended to government that they look at, that it has its own secretariat, and it's something that I think that the UK government has said they're now prepared to explore. But I want to come back to the government's response to our report in a minute, which I think will delight the honourable gentleman in terms of what the government is prepared to do. Yes, of course, to the Chair, the Welsh Affairs...
Appreciate that. I mean, under the suggestion he's making, presumably that would mean that the First Minister of Northern Ireland, when that Assembly is set up again, would have a veto over what was happening in the rest of the United Kingdom if everyone had an equal say.
I think that the honourable gentleman, with all great respect, misunderstands and possibly doesn't really appreciate what we are saying. What we're trying to suggest with our report is that what we call a parity of esteem is established. And it's not it should be right that the UK government should chair all proceedings that set the agenda. That should be the responsibility of all governments, and that the chair is rotated, just the chairing of these things. It's not having a veto, it's just ensuring that there is that sense of equality that exists between four governments in a setting, in a forum, which is supposed to be able to accommodate that. But as Madam Deputy Speaker, it's what we said about the Scotland Office and the role of the Secretary of State that probably caught most of the headlines and the attention of our report when it came out just a few short weeks ago. What we found when we looked at the Scotland Office and the role of the Secretary of State is a department that's more or less being bypassed in two very, very important functions. One is at the highest level of intergovernment relations, like the bilateral meetings between First Minister and Prime Minister. That now seems to be conducted by the de facto Deputy Prime Minister. Now, he does all of that, and there doesn't seem to be much of a role for the Scotland Office in these proceedings. The second thing, which is probably more important that we found, is that bilateral arrangements between ministers from Scotland and Whitehall was being conducted by themselves. There was no going through the Scotland Office. So, just for example, say the Health Minister in Scotland wanted to deal with an issue which was of importance to the UK, there was something they needed to do together, it would be straight to the relevant Whitehall department down here. No role for the Scotland Office. So, we asked the question, what does the Scotland Office therefore really do? Why is it here with all the paraphernalia of a great degree of civil service and stuff? And so we are... Yes, of course.
Just one additional point, that there needs to be formal consideration of the interplay between legislation that is created, say, here and compared with that which was now being created in the Welsh Assembly. Very recently, with the Joint Committee on the Domestic Abuse Bill, there is a piece of legislation in Wales concerning violence against women. There is no formal mechanism to ensure that there is comparison of how legislation that is being created here and legislation that is being created in other places will actually intermesh and not contradict each other.
Well, Lady, and I think that's some of the issues that we discovered and some of the evidence that we took in our committee, and it's an important point to make, and I know that there will be something looked at when this has been progressed. What we did find the Scotland Office does, and it's their right and their prerogative, and of course they could do this, is they wanted to make sure that the role of the UK and the workings of its government is asserted in Scotland. And this seems to be the basis of the Dunlop reviews about how we could make Scotland better love what the UK does. And this seems to be involving a relatively large resource and budget to be able to do this. And it seems like we're going to have to expect a lot of new UK branding with all the associated flagging paraphernalia that go with it. It seems like some sort of bold attempt to make us love them just that a little bit more by visibility. So this is what I was sort of hearing from the Secretary of State yesterday, and we asked him about this, and what I've got is a sense of what they're trying to do is rebranding it. Says the honourable gentleman, they're not liking that. They're saying no, that's not the case. So we shall hear from them about what the Dunlop review is actually going to do. But I'll say to the honourable gentleman and to the Minister, we're really encouraged with the response from the Secretary of State to our report. I think they've agreed to look at practically every recommendation that we've made. We're were really quite excited about the fact that most of the things around the JMC they've said they will look at and will form part of the review of all this, that they're even prepared to look properly at a review of the Scotland office and tell us what it's going to be doing. So we remain encouraged, and so I didn't want to be bitter or sound like I was unhappy with things, but that was all I was hearing yesterday, and the honourable gentleman was at the same meeting as I was. But I think we've got to be positive where it is and thank them for where they are, but most of that response seems to have been quite good so far, so we'll just keep it going. And I say to colleagues on the Scottish Affairs Committee, we've got a role in this, so we'll make sure that that happens. One last time.
Grateful for him giving way. Just to be absolutely clear to the chairman of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee, and he knows that I welcome and support his committee's report that he's describing. But the Dunlop review is about how the United Kingdom government works better to bring benefits of the Union to all parts of the Union. It's quite clearly mischievous on his part to suggest something different.
I think I'm actually repeating what the honourable gentleman said. It's going to be showing us what the UK government does in Scotland. That seems to be... listen, the honourable gentleman he can tell us what he thinks it is. I'm just telling him what I think it is, but there we go. But anyway, and he can just calm down a little bit. You know, he doesn't need to get overexcited. It's a consensual debate. So, we'll just see what happens. But, I am congratulating the UK government for the way that it's positively responded. But I will end, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's right that we continue to look out for devolution. We continue to ensure that it's properly assessed, that it continues to work in the best interests of all our nations across the United Kingdom. But, yes, of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving me. He's given a really important speech, I think, marking the 20 years of devolution and where we go next. And right at the start, he spoke about Winnie Ewing's reconvening of the Scottish Parliament. And that historical continuity is very important for the next steps. The Scottish Parliament was never abolished. It was adjourned and it was reconvened, and where it goes next will be a matter for the people of Scotland. And it was this House of Commons has recognised that now as well, and endorsing that claim of right, that the sovereignty will lie with the people of Scotland.
And it's almost like he reads my mind, because he anticipated that was exactly what I was going to come on to, just to close this very short introduction to this debate, because he's right, this is a matter for the people of Scotland to determine. We have to agree across this, we have to agree that the Scottish people should always get what the Scottish people want. We now said that we agree the sovereignty of the people of Scotland with the claim of right, and I'm delighted that this House passed this. Now, there's an ongoing debate just now, and what I don't like hearing is people saying that democracy will be denied in Scotland and the Scottish people won't get their way if that's what they decide. Now, we have to end that sort of talk. We have to say in the House the Scottish people should always get what they want. It's right that the future of Scotland remains in Scotland's hands. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the 20 years of a Scottish Parliament, it has been thoroughly good. We all agree in that. It has transformed Scotland, made such a difference to our national life. I think what we say now, we look forward to the next 20 years and whatever future awaits.
Hear, hear. The question is, as on the order paper, the House will appreciate that a great many people wish to speak this afternoon, and we have limited time, so we're going to have to start with a time limit of 6 minutes.